There's a time every funeral director learns to fear. An hour that defies all logic, science, even death itself. My name is Marcus, and for 20 years, I've prepared bodies for their final farewell. But there's something I've never told anyone. Every funeral I attend at 3 a.m. goes wrong. No matter how well prepared I am, how careful, how experienced I've become, at 3 a.m. time, the rules of death simply don't apply. If you believe death is predictable, that the dead stay dead, that my work is just science and procedures, you might want to stop listening now, because what I'm about to share will shake your faith in everything you thought you knew about the line between life and death. This is the story of why I never ever work past 2:59 a.m. and why some hours are gateways to things that shouldn't exist. It all started in September 2015. I was working late, preparing the body of Robert Michaels, a 67-year-old man who had died in a household accident. Simple family, traditional funeral, nothing unusual, but I had lost track of time. When I looked at the clock, it was exactly 3 a.m. That's when Robert opened his eyes. Not a post-mortem reflex, not an involuntary twitch. He looked straight at me and said, "You shouldn't be here at this hour." I thought I was hallucinating. Stress, exhaustion, 20 years of dealing with death finally taking their toll. But then Robert sat up on the embalming table and continued, "At 3 a.m., we wake up. All of us. And you're interrupting our time." I bolted from the room. When I came back 10 minutes later, Robert was exactly as I'd left him. Dead, cold, still. But there was something different about his expression. A faint smile, like he knew something I didn't. I tried to convince myself it was a dream, a hallucination. But the next morning, when the family came for their final goodbye, Robert's wife asked me a question that froze my blood. Why is Robert smiling? He never smiled like that when he was alive. After that day, I swore I'd never work past 2:30 a.m. again. But sometimes emergencies happen. Sometimes you don't have a choice. And every time I break that rule, every time I find myself working at 3 a.m., something unexplainable happens. Because 3 a.m., I discovered, isn't just another hour. It's the hour when the dead regain their awareness. When they remember who they were, how they died, and why some of them should never have died at all. And when that happens, when the dead wake up, they're not happy to find a living person intruding on their moment of clarity. They're not pleased to be discovered, and some of them decide to do something about it. This is the story of 7 funerals I attended at 3 a.m. 7 moments when I learned that death isn't the end we think it is, and 7 times I almost didn't live to tell the tale. The second case happened 3 months later. Maria Santos, 34 years old, died from an accidental overdose. Or at least, that's what the report said. I was running late on the prep due to an earlier emergency, and before I realized it, it was 3:05 a.m. Maria sat up on the table and looked at me with a furious expression. "It wasn't accidental," she said. "He forced me to take those pills. My husband killed me." Her words were sharp, lucid, full of rage and desperation. She gave me specific details about how she died. Names, times, locations, information only someone who had been there could know. When morning came, I called the police and passed along everything Maria had told me. 3 days later, after further investigation, it was confirmed that Maria had been murdered by her husband. He was arrested and confessed to the crime. But how could I explain where I got that information? How could I tell anyone that a dead woman had told me the truth about her own murder? The third case was even more disturbing. James Wilson, 45, suicide by hanging. But at 3:14 a.m., James explained that he hadn't taken his own life. "I was trying to adjust a ceiling decoration," he said. "The rope slipped. It was an accident." James was distraught. "My family thinks I abandoned them, that I didn't love them enough to keep going. But I loved them more than anything. I would never leave them on purpose." He cried tears he shouldn't have been able to shed. I started noticing a pattern. At 3 a.m., the dead didn't just wake up. They woke up with an urgent need to tell the truth, to correct misunderstandings, to reveal secrets they'd taken to the grave. The fourth case made me question everything. Patricia Lee, 28, natural death due to organ failure. But at 3:21, Patricia told me she hadn't died of natural causes. "My doctor gave me the wrong meds," she said. "He was testing experimental drugs on me without my knowledge." Patricia gave me specific details about the doctor, about other patients who had died the same way, information that led to a federal investigation and the arrest of a doctor who had been conducting illegal experiments on vulnerable patients. It became clear that at 3 a.m., some higher force was using the dead to reveal truths the living couldn't uncover on their own. But it was also clear that this force didn't like being watched. The fifth time I worked at 3 a.m., the dead didn't want to talk to me. Thomas Bradley, 52, heart attack. When he awoke at 3:33, he looked at me with hostility and said, "You're seeing things you're not supposed to see. Stop coming here at this hour." Thomas stood up from the table, walked toward me and whispered, "They're getting angry with you. The ones who control this hour. They don't like witnesses. Stop now or they'll make you stop." That night I swore I would never work at 3 a.m. again, but sometimes emergencies happen. Sometimes you don't have a choice. And when I broke that promise again, I found out Thomas was right. They really don't like witnesses. The sixth case happened 2 years later. I had managed to avoid working at 3 a.m., but a family emergency forced me to break my rule. Angela Davis, 29 years old, car accident. By the time the body arrived, it was already 2:45 a.m. I tried to rush the preparation to finish before 3, but at exactly 2:59, everything stopped. My instruments stopped working. The lights dimmed. Time seemed to slow down. And then, right at 3 a.m., Angela opened her eyes. But this time was different. Angela wasn't alone. Around the table, I could see other figures, shadows of people I had prepared before. Robert, Maria, James, Patricia, Thomas. They were all there, watching me. "You were warned," Angela said, but her voice echoed as if it came from all the figures at once. "You were told not to come here at this hour, but you kept coming. You kept witnessing our moments of awakening." The figures began to circle the table. Their faces weren't hostile, but there was a terrifying determination in them. "At 3 a.m. we have our time," they said in unison. "Our time to speak the truth, to find peace, to correct injustices." "But you've seen too much," they continued. "You've heard too much. You've become a bridge between our world and yours, and it's disrupting the balance." That's when I understood. It wasn't just coincidence that the dead woke up at 3 a.m. It wasn't just a natural phenomenon. There was a deliberate force behind it, a force using the dead to reveal truths, but one that required privacy to operate. "You have two choices," the figures said. "Stop coming here at this hour or join us permanently. Become part of the system you've been observing. Become one of us who awaken at 3 a.m. In that moment, I felt something I'd never felt before. A pull, an almost irresistible seduction. Part of me wanted to say yes. Part of me wanted to fully understand what happens at 3 a.m., even if it meant crossing the line between life and death for good. But then Angela spoke alone, in her own voice. "Run. Run now. Don't let them convince you. Some secrets are too important to take to the grave, but some prices are too high to pay." I ran out of the funeral home. When I returned the next morning, Angela was perfectly prepared, as if someone had finished my work. But next to the body, there was a note written in my own handwriting. "Last chance." That day I decided I would never break my rule again. I would never work at 3 a.m. But sometimes, fate doesn't give us a choice. Sometimes, we're forced to face exactly what we fear the most. The seventh case came 6 months later, an emergency call at 2:30 a.m., a multi-car accident on the highway, 3 victims, all needing immediate preparation for funerals that same day. I knew it would be impossible to finish before 3 a.m., but the families were desperate. I arrived at the funeral home at 2:45. 3 bodies were waiting: Michael Chen, 35, Sarah Johnson, 28, and David Park, 42. They had all died in the same accident, but they didn't know each other. 3 completely different lives linked only by tragedy. I started working as fast as I could. Maybe I could finish at least 1 body before 3. Maybe I could avoid what I knew was coming. But at 2:58, my instruments began to glitch. At 2:59, the lights began to dim. And then, at exactly 3 a.m., All three opened their eyes at the same time. But this time, something was different. They weren't just awake. They were connected, as if the accident hadn't just taken their lives but had somehow bonded them. "You were warned," said Michael. "You were told not to come here at this hour," Sarah continued. "But you kept coming," David finished. Their voices harmonized in a way that made my skin crawl. The three stood up from their tables in perfect sync. They began walking in circles around me. "You've seen too much," they said in unison. "You've heard too much. You've become a threat to the balance." That's when the entire room filled with figures, not just the dead I had prepared before, but hundreds of others. The dead from other morticians, from other places, from other times, all awakening at 3 a.m., all connected by that same mysterious force. At 3 a.m., we are free, they said. Free to speak the truth, free to find justice, free to correct what was wrong. But that freedom demands secrecy. It demands that the living not know what happens during this hour. You broke the secrecy, they continued. You saw what should not be seen. Now you must choose, keep the secret forever, or become part of it forever. In that moment, I felt the weight of 20 years of work, of all the families I had helped, of all the dead I had prepared. I felt the weight of the life I still had left to live. And so, I made my choice. "I'll keep the secret," I said. "I swear I'll never work at 3A. Hem again. I swear I'll never tell anyone what I've seen, but let me live. Let me keep helping families, just during the hours when the dead rest." The figures watched me in silence for a long moment. Then, Michael, Sarah, and David stepped forward. "Oath accepted," they said. "But remember, some secrets are eternal. Some knowledge comes with responsibilities that never end." And then, at 3:01 a.m., they all vanished. I was alone in the funeral home, with 3 perfectly prepared bodies. As if someone had finished my work while I was making my vow. As if they'd given me one final demonstration of their power. That morning, I completely rearranged my schedule. I never again accept cases that could push me past 2:30 a.m. I never break that rule. And for 5 years, I've kept my oath in absolute silence. Why am I telling this story now? Why am I breaking my vow after 5 years of silence? Because last week, something changed. Something that makes me believe it might be time to warn others about what happens at 3 a.m. I got a call from another funeral director, John Matthews, from the next town over. He sounded desperate, confused, terrified. "Marcus," he said, "have you ever experienced anything strange while working late at night, specifically around 3 a.m.? John told me he'd gone through the same things I had, the dead waking up at 3 a.m., revealing truths, making threats. He too had been forced to make a vow, but unlike me, he broke that vow a week ago. They came for me," John whispered over the phone, "not just the ones I worked on, all of them, hundreds of figures. They said I broke the vow, and now I have to pay the price." The line cut out before he could finish. I tried calling back. The number was disconnected. I went to John's funeral home. It was shut down, abandoned. Neighbors told me John had vanished 3 days ago, leaving only a note. "I've been called to work at 3 a.m. forever." That's when I realized my vow wasn't just about keeping a secret. It was about protecting others from the same temptation, the same danger. John broke his vow, and now he had become part of the very phenomenon we feared. That's why I'm telling this story. Not to break my oath, but to fulfill it in a different way. To warn other funeral directors, other professionals who deal with death about what happens at 3 a.m. If you work with the dead, if you ever find yourself alone with them during the darkest hours of the night, pay attention. Never, ever work at 3 a.m., no matter how urgent it is, no matter how necessary it seems. At 3 a.m., the dead awaken. They rise with purposes we don't fully understand. They awaken with a power that defies everything we know about death. And when they do, they don't like to be watched. Some secrets are too important to take to the grave, but some secrets are far too dangerous to reveal. At 3 a.m., those two kinds of secrets meet. If you've made it this far, if you're still with me after this confession, leave the word awakening in the comments. Not because I want you to experience what I have, but because I want you to remember, some hours are sacred to the dead. And if you work with death, If you sometimes find yourself working late into the night, remember the story of John Matthews. Remember that some prices are too high to pay. Remember that some vows are eternal. It's now 2:55 a.m. In 5 minutes, they will awaken. In 5 minutes, the dead will have their time for truth and justice. And I will be far from here, keeping my vow, honoring my promise. Until the next confession. And remember, some hours belong to the dead. Respect that time. Respect that boundary. Because at 3 a.m. the rules of death simply don't apply. And never ever work at 3 a.m.